The story began about a year ago when the protagonist, Eugene, was blessed with white magic, which was the most useless ability in the world. This destroyed his dream of being a magic swordsman and turned him into an object of mockery because only those with more abilities were considered valuable. Prior to this, Eugene was the top student of his class, but after receiving his miserable blessing from the goddess, no one respected him, and even his girlfriend dumped him. He eventually fled the academy and transferred to another, where he was hired as the Demon Queen's cookie crusher. The Demon Queen, Erin, was once a high archangel who was banished to Earth but was later defeated by a hero and sealed away. Years later, she released herself and was so murderous that only the headmaster could approach her. During the enrollment exam, the academy learnt about Eugene's attribute, powerful white magic, which made him perfect for the job of handling this spicy Demon Queen. Initially, Eugene was just a caretaker who brought Erin offerings, but she became obsessed with him and started asking for his sausage as an offering. One morning, she asked him whether he was going to explore dungeons, but Eugene said he couldn't do that with his ability, so she offered him her Demon Queen power in exchange for her freedom. Eugene was tempted to accept this offer because he couldn't use attack magic, but he turned down her offer while reminding her that only the headmaster could undo the seal. Erin suggested that he sign a contract with her and use her mana to defeat the headmaster, but Eugene said he would never do that. Just then, Eugene noticed that a certain dungeon, Babel, was on fire, followed by an announcement that all students and explorers should assemble at the dungeon's entrance. With no one willing to take the first step, Eugene walked in to investigate the cause of the fire and rescue anyone in harm's way. He'd half expected to find that a fire monster had caused the mysterious fire, but to his utmost shock, found a sweet-looking girl whose body was literally fire. Eugene was skeptical but walked towards her regardless, holding out his hand and asking her if she was okay, but she responded in an unfamiliar language. He then took out a fire-resistant cloak for evacuees and placed it on her, but she soon passed out in his arms. As he walked back home with her, he heard people cursing her for destroying their dungeon and calling her a dungeon destroyer, and some knights told him that the king had summoned him to report to the courthouse with the girl. Eugene told them that the poor girl was still unconscious, but they attacked him, saying he was trying to defy orders, and if he resisted any further, his actions would be regarded as treason, punishable by death. Later at the courthouse, 3 jurors argued about what to do with the dungeon destroyer, and most people wanted them to throw the girl in prison or execute her on the spot. Eugene spotted an assassin aiming at her with a bow and arrow, so he protected them both with his magical shield, and the assassin ran away. After this, a man named Other arrived, who was the king of the dungeon city and also the headmaster of the academy. He asked for everyone's opinion on the girl, and the bishop said that the girl should be sentenced to death. The military guy said that they should permit the military to take custody of her, while the politician said the girl should serve as their lab rat since she possessed extraordinary magical abilities. The king quieted them down, brought out a ring and told Eugene to put it around her arm, and instantly she could communicate in their language. She said her name was Sumer, but she couldn't remember much about her identity or why she suddenly found herself in the dungeon. The king confirmed that Sumi was an Ifrit, a mythical being that had gone extinct in ancient times, and that she had been reincarnated from another world. After a couple of negotiations, the king appointed Eugene as Sumi's guardian, stating that the academy would shoulder the cost of repairing the fire damage. For Eugene, this meant that he had become responsible for Sumi from that day forward. Later, Erin was pissed that Eugene came late to see her because he was preparing a room for Sumi. Throughout that week, he had been extremely busy taking care of Sumi, and this irritated Erin because she felt bored. However, Eugene didn't know how to break it to her that he was still going to see Sumi later. Anyway, he did and gave Sumi a tour of their school. It had been a week since she reincarnated into their world, but she was grateful that the school accepted her as a student and gave her a place to live. Still, the only memories she could recall were foggy ones about her family, and even her most vague recollections were fading away like mere dreams. She wondered whether her past life was just an illusion, but if that was true, then she did not know her identity. Interrupting her thoughts, Eugene called her for their next trip around school to the Department of Student Affairs. Getting in there, she met an elderly elf who stared right through her soul like that bishop dude in the courthouse. He handed her a student identification card and handbook and informed her that the documents were very important as they contained personal information, including her skills and status, so she had to be careful with them. With that, Sumi was officially welcomed to the Magic Academy. Soon after that, some girls in the school, consisting of elves and furries, flocked around Sumi, making her feel welcome. She confessed that she was happy to be accepted and thanked Eugene for the role he played in that. She also bowed to thank him for helping her the other day at the courthouse. Already she was getting soggy for Eugene because he was a cool and gentlemanly guy, and he had rizzed her up without even trying. However, he told her that little things, such as showing her around the school, were part of his job as her guardian. On the walk, Sumi said that the student handbook was huge and would be a hassle to carry around. So Eugene told her to take the book and say the words "close book." The moment she did, it vanished, and when she used "open book," the book reappeared in her hand. That way, she could carry it around without taking up too much space. Further along the walk, Eugene told her that their identification cards permitted them to enter public facilities and cross borders, so they made them easier to carry while traveling, and that it was their IDs that led them into the last dungeon, too, which is where Eugene found Sumi. While they were walking, some dude accidentally brushed Sumi, but she apologized. Together with his association of eternally hopeless virgins, they flopped around, saying she was pretty cute and should hang out with them for a while. But as the guy's hand reached for Sumi, Eugene grabbed his hand and told him to stop. The guy called Eugene a useless, cocky failure who could do 0 damage, but Sumi was confused, wondering why they were saying such things. However, with his hand still in Eugene's hand, the guy found out that he couldn't move and told Eugene to let him go. But upon closer inspection, one of the guy's gang members realized that Sumi was the girl from the other world, and then they started saying creepy stuff about her, saying she could shoot fire and was such a creep, so she shouldn't be in their school. Sumi felt bad hearing them call her a creep, and realizing that the other students only accepted her because she was a reincarnator, but outside that, her identity never mattered to anyone. Thinking to herself, Sumi realized that she could make a life in the academy even if her memories never returned, but she didn't feel like that would be enough for her, as pieces of her would still be missing. With that, she refused to live such a life and was determined to figure out who she was, so there was just one thing to do. Soon enough, the dudes gave up when Eugene let go of the bully's hand, and Eugene told Sumi not to pay heed to what those idiots said. However, she walked past him, over to the balcony, and pointed to the tower in the last dungeon, saying she would like to investigate it, since that was how she came into his world. She hoped she could remember something and maybe find a way to return home. But Eugene was unsettled about this because even though Sumi wanted to return to her world, that dungeon was teeming with unknown monsters, and he could not deal damage or be of any help to her. However, he told her, despite his fears, that he would go to her because deep down, all he wanted was to know that Sumi had hope. Later, Eugene met with the king, who asked how Sumi was faring thus far. He reported that Sumi wanted to explore the last dungeon, and he wanted to take her the following week. So the king told him to keep up the good job because he was counting on him as her guardian. Later, Eugene and Sumi arrived at the tower, but Sumi asked him to drop the honorifics when speaking with her because it felt a little too formal. He realized that this would make their coordination in the dungeon easier, and then told her to do the same, to speak casually with him too. Getting in, Sumi saw a seriously loaded store in the dungeon on the first level, which was the market area, and Eugene explained that exploration in the dungeon started at the third level, which they could ascend to using some sort of elevator. He told her that it was only accessible to people who had reached that level once before, and he could take it to the 5th level since that was where he found her. She asked him what the highest level he had been to was, and he said it was the 9th. But just then, some serious-looking dudes from the Blue Sea Union arrived at the dungeon, bragging that they were going to clear the 10th level. But Eugene told Sumi not to pay the fools any attention because they had more muscle in their brain than neurons. For that, he told her that they should just take the stairs, and it helped because his goal for that day was to familiarize her with the dungeon, and he wasn't in the mood to have issues with those fools. Later, in the field area of the 2nd level, he He showed Sumi that they should expect monsters to start showing up from that level. However, he couldn't use attack magic, and his barriers and heals only had a range of a few paces, so she would be safer not straying too far from him. Sumi was confused and asked him why he couldn't use attack magic and what he meant by that, so he said that in his world, they fought monsters by channeling mana into their weapons. For example, the knife he was holding. He raised his knife and sliced his finger, thereafter channeling magical energy into the knife, which caused it to glow. He then touched his injured finger with it, and there was no longer any injury, so he explained that his ability was that whatever weapon was charged with his magical power healed whatever he attacked. In other words, his ability did 0 damage. Sumi couldn't believe this because he was pretty strong back there, but Eugene explained that his handicap didn't apply to humans, yet he reassured her that he would still get them out of there if they ran into any trouble. As they ventured deeper into the dungeon, Eugene realized that there had been no trouble getting Sumi out because they hadn't encountered a single monster ever since. He could sense monsters on each level, so it's not like the monsters weren't there. But because Sumi was an Ifrit, her high mana levels were probably scaring them away. He never expected her mana to be so powerful, and was pretty sure that it would be nice for her to get some combat experience. After a while, Sumi sighed because she was tired of having hopes that she would remember anything at all, given that they were exactly where Eugene found her. In fact, the place didn't look the same anymore, and it was because Sumi's flames had consumed the plains, although they were back to normal thanks to the dungeon staff and the self-repair system of the dungeon. In any case, there was no point in them wasting time there, so he just straight up asked Sumi whether anything strange had happened to her before the fire. Sumi shared that something had attacked her, which could have been a monster, but other than that, all she remembered was that everyone was running from her due to her flames, and right now. Eugene wondered how to confirm this because Sumi hadn't run into any monsters since they met, so perhaps seeing one would jog her memory. However, he didn't have hopes. He said they should keep moving, and so they did until they encountered some wolf-type monsters. Sumi panicked. So Eugene told her to calm down and first observe her enemy. She placed her shield in front of her and took a defensive stance because Eugene had taught her how to defend herself before they ventured to the dungeon. He also planned that before anything would happen, he would step in and help her. Still, it seemed there was absolutely nothing he would be doing because the moment the monsters spotted fire emanating from Sumi's shield, they instantly dashed off. This was not much of a surprise to Eugene because Sumi's magical energy was on par with 10 skilled mages. The girl noticed her shield was on fire and started panicking, but Eugene asked whether what had happened was an enchantment. It was also known as a spell used to infuse weapons and armor with elemental magic, and Eugene knew this because he had trained in enchant before. Although normally, one needed a specific spell to enchant anything. However, seeing that Sumi's magic had the same effect, it only meant she was more powerful than the eye could determine. They continued to search for monsters up until the 9th level, but none appeared or tried to fight them if they ever did appear. Just before the 10th floor, they braced themselves because they were approaching the boss's area. Even for Sumi, this would be such a dangerous area because Eugene had watched many boss exterminations through the satellite system, and given that he could only protect Sumi without attacking, fighting their way through would be difficult, and he couldn't stand anything happening to Sumi. He asked her what she felt, and she said she wanted to go in because she was desperate to learn about her power and recall her past. However, she held on to him, saying that if he had never been there before, they could probably head back. At that moment, Eugene remembered every mocking statement he had heard about his white magic, and people telling him to give up. However, he was Sumi's guardian and felt he should play it safe and retreat, but something in him was going against what he knew was better because he knew Sumi had potential, and he didn't want her to stagnate. On that very same floor, the adventurers who had gone there to conquer the boss had become Lego blocks for the big guy. Now facing the bear, Eugene told Sumi to issue a challenge, otherwise the battle wouldn't count. However, the boss became ever more ferocious at that moment as it beat up some of the challengers from the Blue Sea faction that had come to defeat it. Sumi instantly moved to help, but Eugene told her that they couldn't do that because the fight was being broadcast on the satellite system, and if they intervened, they would receive a penalty. Among the punishments they could give them, at the very worst, they would ban them from that particular dungeon. Even Eugene wished he could help, but since it was an official challenge, he had to sit on his hands. If the guys there had made an official request for assistance, that would be easy, but they hadn't. And unfortunately, Sumi would have to watch this gruesome sight of fellow comrades getting squashed in battle. One of the guys who had just been beaten up by the boss monster crawled towards Eugene, raising a white flag and asking for assistance. Immediately, Eugene dashed in front of the monster while telling Sumi to stay back. Only the devil knew what this weakling planned to do, standing there with no attack power or anything in sight. The boss monster wasn't kidding either and raised the tree branch he had been using to beat the adventurers and almost landed it upon Eugene, but Eugene stopped him with a magical shield. He then told the guys that he had received their request for aid, and they should escape while they could. As he held the monster down, everyone took off, and the monster instead raised its foot, preparing to squash Eugene. Now, even though Eugene knew he couldn't defeat the boss, it didn't mean he would lose. And so, he amplified his shield using a magical spell, and that stopped the boss for long enough. The monster kept stomping and clanging, and trying in every way possible to override Eugene's shield magic, but it failed. And the guys who witnessed this couldn't help but admit that Eugene was pretty much amazing. Eventually, the monster was too tired to attack, having stomped for so long, and it just gave up. This was pretty surprising, and Sumi told Eugene he was the man, but he reminded her that all he did was buy them time to escape. The guys he saved said he was impressive for a lone fighter, and thanked him for coming to their aid, and so Eugene cast a healing spell upon them, which replenished them and healed their wounds. He asked everyone to show him their injuries and healed them all. In the end, Sumi's memories were the least of their problems, as she had just witnessed a terrifying fight and gained a lot of experience on her first day. Eugene said it was time for them to call it a day, and they decided to leave, but the guys of the Blue Sea faction asked Eugene to lend them his strength. This was because it was obvious those fools couldn't win against the boss, but Eugene displayed so much strength that he could pass for an army of one, and they needed his magic. Eugene said he was honored, but confessed that he couldn't use attack magic. The guys said that it could work if Eugene teamed up with their best warriors to challenge the boss, but Eugene said that would still not work, and they should rather hold back. He suggested hiring skilled fighters and trying another day, but these guys immediately said they couldn't turn back because they needed the money. This expedition was one they had to succeed in and return to their country with treasure, because the fate of their nation rested upon their shoulders, and they couldn't face their king returning empty-handed. Eugene realized why the Baldy looked so agitated earlier on. He devised a plan, saying they could use Sumi's power, but it wasn't quite certain, given how the girl had reacted earlier. They eventually just decided to borrow her shield, but for some reason, their hands got in contact with each other and strange magic enveloped Eugene's body. He explained that it was called Mana Link, and he could use it to borrow some of her magical power. This Mana Link, in quotes, was a technique that siphoned mana from others, and Eugene had used it on plenty of other mages in the past, but every time his white mana canceled out the mana given to him, and he had been unable to make it work. However, Sumi's Ifrit red mana seemed to be just what Eugene needed, but for some reason, his body was heating up so much that he wondered whether he had taken way more from her than he needed. When he had infused enough mana into his body, he let go of Sumi and picked up a sword. Thereafter, he poured his white mana into the sword, and it bent as usual. Typically, because Eugene couldn't attack with a sword prior, it would never go beyond bending. But on this very day, his sword was supercharged with magic, so much so that it produced flames that everyone watched in shock, and Eugene watched with a newfound confidence. Already, he could tell that he could fight with the sword, so he gallantly stepped forward, ignoring the warnings of the Blue Sea faction leader, and said that he would help them defeat that boss for 0 reward. In return, he wanted to fight it all by himself and test to see how strong he was with a magic sword. After creating an official battle with the boss, Eugene clenched his sword and stood before it. It had been ages since he last swung a sword, and even though the goddess's blessing forced him to abandon his dream of becoming an astute swordsman, Eugene never slacked in his sword training. His father had made him take up swordsmanship as a kid, and ever since then, Eugene maintained that habit. Truthfully, he never discarded the ambition of becoming a magic swordsman, and he even had a swordsmanship style passed down through generations in the family. Now the boss monster grabbed a rock from the ground and flung it towards Eugene, but the boy stopped it with his shield and caused the rock to crack. However, the intensity of the attack was so mighty that Eugene was being pushed back even with his shield. He headed towards the others, and they all fled in various directions, but Sumi stood there. The leader of the Blue Siege faction told her to get away from the Challenger's border, but she seemed not to know what it was, and they showed her that there was a certain white line known as the Challenger's border, which demarcated the boss's territory. The boss could not attack them if they were outside the line, but projectiles could still hit them. Staying outside wasn't just dangerous, but Sumi would get in the way of Eugene's fight, and so she was advised to get out of there. Meanwhile, Eugene had to calm himself down because he didn't want to get too hyped about wielding a sword. He first and foremost wanted to end the beast before it could hurt anyone else, so he employed the sword style from earlier and launched himself towards the beast's upper extremity. Thereafter, he managed to slice off the beast's forearm and caused it anguish. That strike alone expended a lot of mana, and Eugene had only enough mana for one more strike, so he planned to get this right the second time. This time around, he wielded the sword using a fire stance and landed a cut directly on the beast's neck, instantly defeating it. The onlookers celebrated him, and Eugene was shocked because all this while he had never known his technique was flawless, and his white mana had rendered that awesome technique completely useless to him. Interrupting his thoughts, Sumi rushed to hug him and said he was awesome, but he told her to be careful before she found herself screaming, "Oh, Daddy," in the middle of the night. Anyway, after she congratulated him, he told her he couldn't have done it without her, but his once-bladed sword now became so basic, and all the mana, the red mana he took from Sumi, was practically gone. Apparently, the amount he siphoned earlier from her using the mana link was only enough for 2 attacks with the magic sword. He wondered, though, how he could fight without putting undue stress on Sumi, but decided that it was something to ponder upon later. After the fight, the guys said they couldn't thank Eugene enough because he permitted them to take the materials and treasure in addition to helping them defeat that boss. However, Eugene said they didn't need the treasure, and if they permitted him to keep the sword he borrowed, that was more than enough for him. With the deal sealed, he returned and got into the elevator with Sumi, who admitted that helping people was one of the most fantastic things ever. This reminded Eugene of a conversation he once had with his father, and he told Sumi that helping others wasn't bad, but it was dangerous for an explorer to be such a bleeding heart. When Eugene was younger, his father told him to wield the sword for the benefit of others because it was a source of pride for men of their generation. And as a matter of fact, wielding the sword for others would one day bring a smile to Eugene's face, and he would only understand that when he experienced it. Years later, Eugene's father's words came true, and he smiled. Later, Aaron congratulated Eugene on his victory against the boss and said he should keep the momentum up and climb to the peak of the tower. However, he told her that it wasn't as easy as she thought because he had only won thanks to the power he got from Sumi. Somewhat, this made Aaron jealous, especially given how casually Eugene had referred to Sumi, but he reminded her that he was Sumi's guardian. In her heart, though, Aaron was pissed about the whole thing, saying even if he could do whatever he wanted, she didn't want to have to deal with all of that. Eugene told Aaron, though, that what he had with Sumi was different because he was trying to help her settle into their world and had to put up a strong front for her, so the relationship was different from what he and Aaron had. This somehow touched Aaron, and she walked. She grabbed him, saying he had no idea what effect his words had on the ladies. Later that day, Eugene took Sumi on another tour of their school since they had been interrupted the first time. He looked pretty worn out and exhausted, and Sumi wondered whether he had got enough sleep last night. Anyway, he took her to the building in which the student council room was found. As they walked in, a lady excitedly called out to Eugene and hugged him, thinking he had come to visit her. Sumi wondered who on earth the girl was, but Eugene first of all pushed her off his body and calmed her down, saying he was showing Sumi around and they could catch up another time. The girl turned and looked at Sumi with some menacing eyes, asking if she was the girl from another world. Sumi acknowledged that she was, and the girl introduced herself as Sarah, the saint candidate from the Cardia Halidom, who was also the student council president and Eugene's ex. At that moment, Eugene wanted to dig a hole in the earth and bury himself alive, but Sarah kept yapping, saying she and Eugene had once formed a party to explore and conquer the last dungeon, even though that only lasted for the first 6 months after they were enrolled in the academy. Eugene shared that Sarah was a cleric who was bad at healing magic, although she had grown significantly and could wield a holy sword while also doubling as the school's best paladin. Sarah and Eugene disbanded their party, although Sarah said she never wanted it to end, and it was the only way she could protect Eugene from the envy of their classmates. Anyway, Sarah ridiculously suggested that Eugene should start over again with her and form a party while ditching Sumi. Although Sumi had been quiet all this time, she wasn't having any of this tomfoolery, so she spoke up. However, Sarah gave a bombastic side-eye and snubbed her while clacking away with her heels. At this point, Sumi wanted to roast the girl alive because she couldn't understand the audacity she had to ignore her. Sumi followed her to air out her grievances, but Sarah said that she had something important to discuss with Eugene, and Sumi had to shut her trap up for a bit. Sumi was trembling in anger, wondering what she had done to deserve being spoken to in such a manner, and she burst out eventually, saying that she was Eugene's partner now, and it was Sarah, his ex, who should shut her mouth. This certainly got to Sarah, and she said that they would have a contest to determine which one of them was the right partner for Eugene. The poor guy wondered what he had done to get himself to that point, but he couldn't stop them. Sarah went first and activated a skill known as the Holy Sword, which released hundreds of swords towards the target all at once. When she did so, she turned and said it was Sumi's turn next. By then, the sand in the hourglass had barely gone anywhere, and so she told her that both the hourglass and the targets would reset and regenerate for her turn. Now seeing how quickly Sarah had done hers, Sumi wondered whether she was capable of doing it faster than Sarah because she had only accepted the challenge in the heat of the moment. Staring at Eugene, Sumi knew that if she lost, it meant she wouldn't be able to spend time with him, and so she refused to lose. But soon, her flames spread out on their own, and she lost control of them as they almost engulfed the place. Sarah quickly helped to control the flames, using her saber of light, while Eugene advised Sumi to learn to control her emotions so she could also control her magic. She felt bad and apologized, but he told her not to worry and offered to help her practice getting her mana under control. Surprisingly, Sarah said she would also help Sumi in her practice. Sumi thanked her for saving her and still offering to help her practice, but Sarah said she was only helping Sumi so she could relieve some of Eugene's workload. At first, to Sumi, Sarah did seem to be nicer than she presented herself to be, but she quickly noticed that this was all an attempt to get closer to Eugene and spend more time with him, so Sumi realized the girl was awful after all. After training with Sarah, Eugene and Sumi resumed their adventure into the dungeon. Unfortunately, Sarah couldn't come with them because her duties as a student council president awaited her. Eugene told Sumi that the more dangerous monsters would appear from the 11th level onwards, and that he would have to borrow some of Sumi's red mana if they ever got in a fight. Sumi said that it sounded like so much work to keep enchanting a weapon and wished that pre-enchanted weapons existed. But Eugene told her that they did exist as permanently enchanted swords, also known as holy swords. However, Eugene could not use anything with permanent enchantment because his white mana was so powerful that it erased the spell. Besides, he did not have fond memories of permanently enchanted weapons. This took him back to a memory with his dad, when the man told Eugene that he could still fight using a permanently enchanted weapon despite his white mana. However, the moment Eugene wielded that sword, all its enchantment disappeared, and his father was quite disappointed, having spent 3 million gold coins to acquire it. Anyway, this made Sumi all the more curious as to why he could use her mana without any issues. But Eugene said he didn't know, and perhaps her mana was special because she was an Ifrit. Eugene theorized that Sumi's mana was more powerful than the normal kind, so that would be just why. Just then, a grumpy goblin attacked them with a knife, and Sumi got behind Eugene. He told her that goblins usually hunted in packs, and she shouldn't be fooled by their size because they could surround one in seconds, and so they should exterminate it before it would call on its fellow buddies. Sumi seemed not to like the idea of taking the goblin's life, and suggested that they neutralize it like before. Although this was strange to Eugene, he realized that it was because in Sumi's world, monsters never existed, so the thoughts that he felt normal for him were strange to her, for example, taking a life. However, Eugene knew he had to do something about this, and he asked her if she was prepared to take a monster's life, because exploring a dungeon meant exterminating the monsters within it. If they simply injured the monsters, such monsters may return for revenge, and if they fought one, then they just had to slay it without fear. He asked her if she could press onwards knowing this, but before any of that could happen, the other goblins soon showed up. Immediately, both Eugene and Simi assumed a fighting stance, and he told her that her goal was to regain her memory, and taking monsters' lives was an unavoidable part of that, but he wouldn't force her if she didn't want to and would respect her choice. Somehow, his words made her float in love, and with determination, she told Eugene that she definitely wanted to. He asked her to take back her memories and not remain incomplete. In other words, she was willing to take down monsters, finally. He told her to handle one side while he handled the other, and having established the mana link and channeled the energy into his sword, Eugene was all set to get rid of the monsters. However, in no time, Simi was already releasing flames from her body and cast a spell known as the Fire Storm. With the goblins set ablaze, Eugene seemed shocked and impressed at the same time because this was a high-tier fire spell, and he had never ever taught Sumi such advanced magic. Her power was at that point on par with a court mage's power, and it seemed like she didn't cast it consciously because even Sumi looked pretty shocked. Anyway, Eugene was glad they won't have to worry about a fire breaking out, so he planned to continue exploring right away. But Sumi ran to where the dead bodies of the goblins were gathered and offered a prayer for them. Eugene wanted to slap the sympathy out of her but accepted it as her virtue and instead congratulated her on her first victory. Moments later, they had pretty much cleared out the area, and the aroma of something delicious hit their nostrils. Eugene said that it was getting late, so they would continue fighting another time. But for now, they could go home and grab some dinner. They headed towards the dungeon elevator, but somehow encountered a heavily fruited damsel taking her bath. Seeing a lady bathe so peacefully made Sumi question whether or not they were in the dungeon. But the lady, who should have been embarrassed, stepped out unclad, pointing at Eugene as the biology club's errand boy and the president's favorite. Later, she got dressed and introduced herself as Leona, a member of the Magic Academy's martial arts club. She said she didn't think anyone would have seen her breathing, while Eugene and Sumi apologized for not noticing her in time. Leona recognized Sumi as the new girl who teleported from another world and then offered them dinner as an apology for startling them. They joined her on the campsite of the martial arts club, even though they had turned down her invitation. Leona was quite friendly and bubbly, engaging everyone on the site. Later on, she presented them with soup, and the aroma reminded Sumi that it was what she had perceived when they were in the dungeon earlier. The moment she took a bite, she remembered that she had once tasted the flavor, although she couldn't place where she had. Leona told her that the dish was called curry and was popularized by a reincarnator who came into their world from the past. Eugene asked Sumi whether she used to eat curry back in her world, but she just stared because, unfortunately, food from her original world didn't bring back any memories, but still somehow made her happy. Feeling sad for her, Eugene told Sumi that they should do their very best in the dungeon so she could regain her memories as soon as possible. Interrupting their conversation, Leona said she had something to discuss with both of them, which, much later, was revealed to be an invitation for them to join their camp. However, Eugene asked if it was allowed for her to invite people who aren't part of the club, not to mention that she was in the middle of a dungeon exploration. Eugene and Leona said normally it wouldn't be okay, but their goal for the trip was to reach and clear the 20th level. However, they had been informed about a concerning rumor that lately the bosses in Babel Tower had gotten more powerful. Apparently, the troll Eugene defeated made people aware that such rumors were true, because in the past, one would never have seen a monster that powerful on the 10th level, and instead, it would have been on the 20th or even the 30th level. Eugene said that was his first boss fight, so it was understandable that he didn't notice anything off. But he felt that with Leona's current number of club members, they could handle it. However, she said that they were the martial arts club's third-string exploration team. Sumi looked lost, so Eugene explained that the Magic Academy had different clubs, such as combat-oriented ones like the Martial Arts Club, which explored the dungeon as one of their club activities. Some of the best fighters in the school were said to be in the martial arts club, and they had even less to worry about than most students. But Leona chipped in, saying they were the third string. The first string was gunning for the higher levels. Meanwhile, the third string was helping new members to gain experience on the lower levels. She felt Eugene's fight proved that the rumors of more dangerous monsters were not just rumors, and they wondered if they could defeat the boss on their own. But since he defeated the giant troll, if they had him on their side, they would certainly win over the monster. After a while, Eugene and Sumi agreed to help them, and Sumi was invited to take a dip in the hot springs with Leona. Leona thanked Sumi and said Eugene was such a nice guy, unlike the rumors that were spreading in school about him. Apparently, people said he transferred to their school under dubious circumstances and was a powerful swordsman, but all he could use was white mana. Yet, for weird reasons, the headmaster was giving him special treatment, and it was quite obvious that something was off. Sumi thought back to the time when some creepy dude picked a fight with Eugene and said something similar. But Leona said she had now established that Eugene was an earnest and humble guy, whose strength was the real deal, and that perhaps people were just jealous of him. She felt like he could clear up the misunderstanding about him, but refused to approach others just like that because he was kind of a loner. As Sumi took in all this information, she realized that Eugene was a pretty unassuming dude who did not possess a strong will. She also wondered what dubious circumstances led him there, but her thoughts were interrupted when some girls in the club asked her to share more about her world. She confessed that she didn't remember much and returned to thinking about Eugene, saying he perhaps never wanted to talk about his own life, which was why he never said anything. Perhaps also he was the same as Sumi, but still placed a healthy distance between the two of them. She felt sad because she thought both she and Eugene had become friends, yet she didn't know the first thing about him. Since she was buried deep in thought, she couldn't sleep, so she stood up to take a walk. She also thought to herself that if he didn't want to talk about it, then she would just drop it, but she would ask him before anything else. Eugene had earlier said he had a tent to himself, so she walked around and found him, but soon became mute and completely shy. Upon approaching his tent, Eugene invited her to get inside so he could get inside her. She wondered what on earth she was doing alone with a guy in his tent at midnight, and why she had become such a nasty girl. Anyway, he gave her a cup of tea and asked her if there was something on her mind or if she wanted to ask him anything. She said she would like to know more about him, especially stories from his childhood or why he picked up swordsmanship. Eugene was quiet and suddenly memories of his past flashed before his eyes, but suddenly he started gasping, and Sumi had to get him out of that state. She asked him if he was okay, and he said that he was and that he didn't mind sharing his story, even though it was going to be really long. Eugene narrated that he started attending a military academy when he was younger and got in thanks to his dad's position as the Imperial Sword, also known as the Emperor's right-hand man. Eugene himself was rumored to be a pretty good swordsman himself, and in that very academy he met Ifrit, the 7th princess of the Empire, who challenged him to a duel. They sparred with each other, and after a while the princess fell to the ground, frustrated and defeated. With tears in her eyes, she complained that they had fought over 20 duels, yet she hadn't left even a scratch on Eugene. However, he told her they should call it a day, but the princess refused and insisted on having one more round. For Eugene, it was the first time sparring with someone his age, and back then, Ifrit was the best in her class when it came to swordplay, but there he was, absolutely destroying her. It was Ifrit who had challenged him, but he steeled himself to receive a stern warning about having won an imperial princess. After that day, the princess continued to challenge him to duels daily. On the other hand, Eugene was taking a makeup test, and the princess found out, so he acknowledged that he was an empty skull and could only read and write. Compassionately, the princess offered to tutor him, and in exchange, he taught her the techniques of swordsmanship that his father had taught him. Essentially, they spent the days helping each other, and before they could realize it, they were already competing for the top spot in their class and had become friendly rivals. Several years later, the princess asked Eugene what his plans for the future were, and he said perhaps he would become a magic swordsman like his dad, because swordsmanship was all he had going on for him. She asked him if he was going to be the Imperial Sword just because his father used to be a mercenary, and he said yes. For generations, Eugene's family members were fighters in the service of a small kingdom in the eastern continent. But their homeland was wiped out in a massive war, and Eugene's mother died giving birth to him a day before the war. Thereafter, his dad took him and fled to the southern continent, where he began to work as a mercenary. One day, Eugene's father rescued the crown prince from a dragon, and that was how he came to serve the empire. Nowadays, his father was still the imperial sword and worked as hard as the emperor's right-hand man, and he taught Eugene to learn to protect himself. With those words, his father hammered swordsmanship skills into Eugene, and Eugene wanted to work in his father's footsteps, wielding his sword for others. Moved by his story, the princess asked him to wield his sword for her, and he said he would, and he said he would certainly protect her after he became much stronger. Eri was shocked, wondering whether he wasn't strong enough already, but Eugene said he wasn't strong enough to keep her safe and had to train even harder. Even back then, despite what Eugene said, he had already decided that he would become Eri's imperial sword, and the day of the selection exam finally arrived. The exam of that day was to determine the fate of every student, and back then, Eugene and Eri were already so close, not engaged yet, but their parents had already approved of their relationship. Finally, Eugene was called to the stand to receive his ability from the goddess. On his way, people murmured, wondering what he would become, and Eugene himself just hoped he would get an ability that would help him become a magic swordsman. He raised his card, hoping that he was taking his first step to becoming Eri's imperial sword. But the goddess scammed him, and Eugene's card showed white mana as his only ability. Unfortunately, white mana could only heal and defend, and now he could no longer become a magic swordsman. Even worse, the princess received a rainbow-colored card, granting her 7 abilities, which was proof that she was an elite among the elite. Despite all he had gone through, Eugene clung to the last vestiges of hope and scoured through historical records for a way to fight using nothing more than supportive magic. He hoped that even if he could only heal and defend, protecting Eri would at least be possible. He had tried to fight against the fate that had already been decreed for him, but perhaps Eugene was only trying to concentrate on something to take his mind off the vast difference in power that existed between himself and Eri, and also to avoid facing how pathetic he had become. Even though he hadn't solved his dilemma, things became way worse for him, and Eri confronted him, saying they should spend some time apart. He couldn't believe her words, and she said it was up, and her friends spoke up on her behalf, saying it was obvious that Eugene was no longer on the same level with Eri, and a reject like him would cause her nothing but trouble if he kept hanging out with her. Besides, the third prince from a powerful country in the Republic had asked for Eri's hand in marriage. Eugene didn't believe the girl's words and asked the princess to tell him the truth, and she only looked at him in a way that confirmed all he had heard was true. Thereafter, they slammed the door and left him, and Eugene dropped out of the military academy. With his father's help, Eugene got into the magic academy, and the rest was history. When he was done narrating his story, Sumi was angry enough to crush little Willie, because the princess was silly and unbelievable. However, Eugene said not to blame the princess because she was carrying an entire empire on her shoulders, and he believed she was a good girl. Still, Sumi huffed and puffed about it, and Eugene realized that she really was a good girl who never hesitated to show her emotions. Anyway, Sumi said she had learnt that setting a record for floors explored was a great honor, and so she wanted to join hands with Eugene to attain that goal, so that she would try to regain her memories while Eugene would get back as the princess. For some reason, Eugene was surprised because this idea had never occurred to him, but perhaps borrowing Sumi's idea would make sense because it had been a long time since he last set a goal for himself. Anyway, the next day, he set out for his exploration with Sumi, and Leona said she was counting on him. When they finally began exploring the dungeon, most of the team members were fighting orcs, while Eugene focused on helping to heal their injuries. His healing magic was so fast and impressive that they said he should become the official healer of the martial arts club. Ever since Eugene and Sumi joined the martial arts club members on their exploration, they had noticed that these guys were super strong, and so strong that they believed that they were just members of the third string. Their goal for that day was to explore up to the 20th floor of the dungeon. But just when they arrived at the boss's area, Eugene suddenly had a very bad feeling about it. Typically, he wouldn't have continued exploring and would have just quit if he were on his own. But since he was with the whole squad, he didn't get to make such decisions, and everything was left in the hands of their captain. Leona, faced with a tough decision to make, considered all the facts and said that they should proceed to explore that dungeon, but to do so with caution. As they continued exploring, they noticed the whole place was quiet, and there was no monster in sight. In the first place, the floor boss was supposed to be a goblin king, so there should be swarms of goblins around. But the only goblin they found was already dead. Eugene, seeing this, confirmed that this was a very bad sign and told Leona that even though he wasn't authorized as a member of their party, he would suggest that they retreat. As he said so, the members started murmuring, saying they were retreating for no reason. But Eugene explained that in the floor boss's territory, there weren't supposed to be any monsters other than their own kind. So the fact that the goblin deer was dead meant that there was a different type of monster, and the floor boss monster was definitely changing. This was said to happen on rare occasions when different floor bosses could spawn at the same time and fight each other for dominance. And if one were unfortunate enough to run into that, they would have to face two floor bosses at once. This was a situation Eugene said that an adventurer should avoid, no matter how confident they were in their skills. Because other than the Goblin King, the floor bosses that usually appeared on the 20th floor were the Kobold King or the Orc King. But even so, it was just too quiet for such an aggressive species. Thereafter, Leona said it was safe for them to assume that there was an unexpected monster on that floor. So she advised everyone. She ordered them to head for the dungeon elevator. Her team members murmured, saying they came all the way for nothing, and it would not have been a problem since they had Eugene and Sumi, and that they also had the deal of revival. Sumi asked Eugene what the deal with the revival was, and he explained that it was a magical tool that could only be used on the 100th floor of the final dungeon, and below to resurrect a dead explorer who died in the dungeon, but there were conditions for it to work. But their conversation was interrupted when they sighted a three-headed dog, the Hound of Hades or Cerberus, which was casually eating the Goblin King. The students immediately knew to take to their heels under Leona's command, and Eugene grabbed Sumi while thinking and wondering why there was such a beast on a lower floor. In the process, Sumi tripped and fell, and for some reason, an announcement was made that the 100th floor trial of the gods would now commence. Immediately, Eugene activated a form of barrier magic known as concealment, which should prevent the dogs from seeing them, although he knew they couldn't fool the nose of such animals. He told Sumi to keep quiet, and one of the dogs' heads literally looked into the tree where they were hiding, but thanks to Eugene's magic, it didn't see them there. Sumi asked what that was, and Eugene explained that the three-headed beast was the Hound of Hades, which was a divine beast that only appeared on the 100th floor or higher. Leon was quite confused himself, wondering why the trial of the gods, said to be a trial from the goddess herself, would appear on the 20th floor, because the divine beasts were completely different from other beasts, and no human had ever managed to defeat the Hound of Hades. He wondered what to do, but the announcement was made that the trial of the gods had concluded, as all challengers had died. Instantly, Sumi was filled with terror and told Eugene that at least they could revive the dead adventurers using the deal of revival that he had earlier spoken about. However, he disappointed her, saying it wasn't an all-powerful potion, because unless it was used within 24 hours, it had no effect. Plus, there were chances of after effects such as memory loss, or one could be unlucky and lose a part of their body. She still hoped that these adventurers would be resurrected, but Eugene told her that it could only happen if the students were not devoured by a divine beast or a monster. This spelt doom, and Sumi couldn't hold herself back as she thought of Leona and every other person who had lost their lives. Eugene comforted her and told her to calm down, saying that just because the adventurers died didn't mean that they were eaten by the divine beast. But just then, an announcement was made that to the new challengers within the territory, the time left for the trial of the gods was 1 minute. Eugene wondered why this battle was still continuing, and as the countdown happened, Eugene braced himself to protect Sumi. And then he told her to stay within the concealment while he acted as a decoy. Sumi told him he couldn't do that because it was reckless, but he promised her that he had a plan and asked her to trust him. But first, he asked to borrow some of her magic, and after the magic link was established, Sumi asked Eugene to promise to come back alive. He held her hand and told her that he would, and then he proceeded with his concealment magic. As he stepped out, he remembered that part of the defeat conditions for the battle against the three-headed dogs was called a timeout. However, losing by running out of time didn't mean one got to lose their lives. Rumors were spread that it was a measure to give more challengers a chance, and when the time ran out, the divine beast would return to where it was summoned from. But now, Sumi and Eugene were in the divine beast's territory, and if they had just stayed hidden, aiming for a timeout, they would have been found eventually. Besides, there was a limit to how Eugene could fight while trying to protect Sumi. There were 3 seconds left, and Eugene planned to draw the attention of the beast to buy some time. So eventually, when the countdown expired, it was announced that Eugene's challenge had been accepted, and there was no turning back. Eugene was determined that no matter how difficult his fight with the beast was, he would have to keep fighting until time ran out. As the beast raised its claws towards Eugene, he thought he could simply parry it, but he got scratched on the side and started bleeding. Eugene used his healing magic upon himself and activated a barrier known as the shield and activated his magic barrier. However, that was destroyed as soon as he created it, and he realized that if he only kept defending, he would be worn out pretty quickly. Choosing to attack, he used the Skywalk skill and then the Lion's Slash, but unfortunately, that barely cut a hair from the beast's body, and he realized how useless his attack was and the magic from Sune, which was limited. He got wounded again and healed himself, and then activated a full-body armor. He realized that his white mana wouldn't last much longer, and remembered the offer that Eren had given him earlier to create a contract with her, so he would obtain the Demon Lord's mana. She also informed him that by being held in his arms, both of them were in a state of physical contact, but that was a temporary contract where their bodies were connected by mana. And if Eugene wanted her powers, all he had to do was call Eren's name, because her mana was inside his body waiting for its turn to shine. Since he realized that the fight against the hounds was quite hopeless, Eugene was going to make a contract with the Demon Lord after all. But remembering that Ellie was the Demon Lord who had once ruled the southern continent, doing something of that nature would endanger the continent again. However, he wondered if Eren was really evil, because all he knew was that she was outrageously arrogant, although she wasn't a bad person. There were moments in Eugene's life when he felt the terrifying presence of the Demon Lord in her, but before her role as the Demon Lord, she was Eren. And right now, he had no choice but to bet on her, so he would just go ahead and trust her. Right before this three-headed dog, Eugene formed a contract with the Demon Lord, and dark mana overtook his body right above. Thereafter, his life force was drained away, and his consciousness slowly left him. However, Eren called out to Eugene, telling him to protect his mind with barrier magic. She was able to communicate with him because they had a contract, and so the telepathy between them was a given. She instantly told him to hurry up, or else he would become a vegetable, and Eugene gradually got back on his feet and activated the Heart of Steel. With this renewed strength, he went forward with his dark black blade, which had now been transformed into a dark blade due to the Demon Lord's power overflowing within him. But just as he wielded the sword, the beast growled loudly and cleared the scene, and Eren explained that this meant it had recognized him as a worthy opponent. Seeing that the monster had cleared the thick forest for their fight, Eugene realized that there was no time for him to stall, and his best bet would be to defeat the monster in one hit. He geared up and swung his sword using a special sword style, but it only managed to cut off one of the 3 heads, meaning he had 2 to defeat. But to his utmost surprise, Eugene saw the beast suddenly and mysteriously disappear, and thereafter he was announced as victorious. He didn't believe this at first, but eventually, when he saw his sword gradually disappear from his hands, Eugene realized he had won, and as he passed out on the floor, he raised his hand to celebrate his victory. On the other hand, Eren, who had been watching this from the top of the tower, was finally glad that Eugene was all hers now. Will Eren ever truly have Eugene all to herself with Sumi and Sarah in the picture? And will Eugene finally get back at his ex? If you can't wait to see the look on that she-devil's face, type "Spicy Demon Lord" for part 2. Give a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video and subscribe to the channel for similar content. As always, thanks for watching.